This is the Griffin Realty Group Ask-A-Griffin podcast, episode number 44. We continue our series on negotiation, and the question on the table is, how will you know where the final price will be? Are you a home seller or a home buyer who has questions about selling or buying residential property, but you can't find an easy way to get your answers? Well, then, hey, you are definitely in the right place. I'm Danny Griffin, the founder of the Griffin Realty Group and the host of the Ask-A-Griffin podcast. And to help you take immediate action to get started in the right direction, if you need to sell or buy property right now or in the near future, you can take advantage of our free step-by-step guides that are waiting for you at griffincourses.com. That's GRIFFINcourses.com. All right, let's get started. We continue in this series on the buy side for negotiation, and the question on the table is, how will you know where the final price will be? Well, it's difficult, but there are some steps that can lead you to a pre-conclusion before you really get into the final pricing. Let's talk about this. The first point is that if you want to get a sense of what you do, control over this purchasing process so that you're not chasing, and again, this is in a hot market too. My best advice to all buyers caught up in a hot market: you must study the potential sales range in advance using real market statistics. So let's just presume, like the Boston market had been for a long time. Now it's cooled down, but it had been very hot, multiple offers. Now Cape Cod market's very hot, multiple offers. So how do you jump onto that train if you're a buyer and feel good? Well, you study. It's simple, and it's not rocket science. What we do with our clients when we first meet a buyer is we say, look, tell us a little bit about where you'd like to be and what price range you think you'd like to be in. And then, of course, through the buyer training in the course, we want them pre-qualified, or they talk to their banker and determine very clearly how much cash they want to spend, so they get set up that way, okay? Now, the idea is the very first smart step for all buyers is to study what has recently sold in that price range so that you know what the money is buying. It's really important because, again, no property is exactly like the next property, but at least if you know 3 or 4 properties that have sold in these neighborhoods that you like and this price range that you prefer to be in, you can see what the money buys. So there will be certainly big differences in the lot and the style, but let's just say, suffice to say, you're looking for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch with X square footage. You want 1 floor. You want a couple garage, bays. It's easy enough to go find recently what sold like that. And you can look at the pictures, you can look at the details, you can look at how long it was on the market, you can look what the asking price was, you can see what it sold for. You can be well studied. I mean, that's the greatest thing about the multiple listing service, is that it has an enormous amount of market statistics that if you just sit still in the beginning with your buyer agent and have a better process, you'll be studied enough to understand what you're looking at. Now, if you just run blindly off your telephone app and you run right into the open house and you do no homework, especially if you're educated and you've done homework and you've been to school and you have degrees, what are you doing? That's what you're supposed to do when you're making one of the largest financial and emotional transactions in your lifetime. Slow down, do your homework. That's number 1. Number 2 is, when you go into this discussion or this negotiation, understand best practices in negotiation. I know some of you sales-oriented folks are going to tell me that you've read this book or this has worked for you. This is just simply my best advice after thousands of hours of teaching this and taking buyers through the process. I'm not a huge believer that drawing lines in the sand does anything but rarely work. So be prepared for a two-sided negotiation. So let me give you a little bit of an edit on that. Of course, when you are in a buyer's market per se, meaning there's a lot of inventory and the seller's just happy that you showed up, sure, you're going to have some more power to draw the seller down, presuming they're overpriced for that market. Be careful, though. Don't think that just because it's a buyer's market that a seller can't be in the catbird seat. Smart sellers, when it is a buyer's market, they get their house really prepped up really well and they price it very sharply for the current market conditions. So a good seller with good advice knows how to flip a buyer's market into a seller's market. See it all the time. But don't go in there with some sort of a more powerful than thou attitude, is the nicest way I can say it. understand that this is a two-sided negotiation. You have the power of the statistics. You know the days on market are a little bit slower. You understand that if you have a good buyer agent, they're getting a feeling for, is this a hot house even in a buyer's market or not? So they're educating you. But go in thinking about not hammering somebody. I mean, again, I have seen it. So I'm not going to be an absolutist here and say, I have seen people go in with cash and they say, look, here's the deal. I'll put this on the table and I'll close it. And if they catch the right seller who's feeling a sense of desperation, that might work. But it rarely does. Rarely. And again, to those sellers, we always advise, well, why didn't you just lower the price so you could attract somebody other than that type of buyer? So again, on the buy side, let me say to the investor with cash or the cash buyer who's in a very strong position, if you see something going out even longer on the market and you have a sense that that person really sells, maybe doing a once and final offer gets you there. But really, is it really that price sensitive to you, where that if you don't get it at that exact number, you're saying that you wouldn't be a little bit flexible if it was still a tremendous deal? I hope you would. Otherwise, you've lost all your logic. So be prepared for somewhat of a two-sided negotiation, even when it's lopsided to one side or the other, okay? But in this case, we're talking about the buy side. Be ready to go back and forth a little bit with the seller. Everybody feels better. And that brings me to the third point here, is that sellers have to have a process. So the point was, all that matters is where the seller ends up, so be patient. And sometimes, like I said, let's go back to that example. Sometimes you go in and you make a firm offer and that's it. And somebody just says no and they dismiss you outright and you walk, quote unquote. Well, be patient. A lot of deals come back to people because when they go out and they're able to look at what else the market would bear for their property, and especially if they make a price adjustment and nothing happens, your deal starts to look more appetizing. And that might come to you. Right? I just don't like working with buyers that keep backing it up on a seller. I just think that's all nonsense. I don't like that. I just don't like being involved when people treat each other like that. I'm talking about more so that somebody's done their homework with me or one of my agents. We know the math. We know what would be fair. We know the market circumstances, and we kindly and patiently make an offer. Say, we understand this might not work for you at the moment. We're going to keep looking. In the meantime, we like your property. If we don't find something else that we like as much, we'll still be here for discussion. And that can sometimes really help the seller come down to reality. It gives the seller's agent, the listing agent, some time to talk some sense into a seller who might be emotional, who might be worried, who might be attached. There are a lot of reasons why that seller's having a process where they dig in. But I'll guarantee you one thing, drawing lines in the sand and not having any patience, you as the buyer might miss out on a fabulous opportunity. Because then also, if you're being a harsh buyer and you're not being reasonable, they'll shop your deal too. Once they decide that, yep, that was a pretty low offer, I guess that's all the market's going to bear, but not to that guy, not to that gal. And they'll go shop you and they'll sell it to somebody else. So the idea is just be patient with that person. Don't throw a conniption that they didn't come right to where you want them to be. That's the strange thing about negotiation that I've seen over the years. A lot of really smart people get nervous in negotiation. They'd never admit it, but they do. And they come in like a bull in a china shop, making these big grand statements, these stiff statements. And when somebody doesn't come back to them, it's almost like they throw a tantrum. I can think of one at $2 million that I had this year where this could have easily been a deal. And it was just the strangest thing that the buyer came in, and it wasn't my buyer. So the buyer came in. We did a big off market, back and forth with them, and they just went back and forth, and all of a sudden, instead of listening to our guidance, just came in and did something completely different. It was almost like they couldn't help themselves. And so it was like, no. We told you all this. No, I mean, there would have been some reasonable negotiation, but they just completely ignored us. So it was just an easy no. No, we'll just keep working on the house and we'll put it on the market when the market gets to the other side of the winter. That was it. Well, of course, they didn't go out and find anything else that was as good of a value. And then they sort of came circling semi-back around. And it's like, what are you trying to win? And especially in this case, the couple was elderly. What is it that you're trying to win that within a small margin, 1-2%, is it really going to make that big difference in your life, right? Is your money paradigm so locked in that you just have to win, almost like there's blood in the streets, like Rothschild said? right? I just think that you can get a good deal without feeling that sense of really dominating a negotiation. I've won plenty of fabulous negotiations. One of the houses I own right now is a fantastic deal. And it was just sitting there in plain sight. Most of my deals have been sitting there in plain sight. I didn't have to beat anybody up, quote unquote. I was able to just say, look, this is what I'm willing to do. And I've also lost deals like that where I said, I'm willing to do this, and I kind of regret it. I wish I'd come up a little bit. I wish I'd been more flexible. So the advice I'm giving you here as a buyer is something I've actually lived, not just coached as an agent. All right, let me go back and hit these points. So we're in this series on negotiation, really important part of this entire buyer process. And the question on the table is, how will you know where the final price will be? And by the way, I use a term called the reality range. That's where it will fall. So how do you figure out the reality range? Well, the first point is you must study the potential sales range in advance using market statistics, also known as what's sold in this price range. Next point is drawing lines in the sand really works. So be prepared for two-sided negotiation, because the reality range is not your one-sided reality. It's that sense of win-win, even when it skews one side or the other based on what's happening in the market. Third point is all that matters is where the seller ends up. So be patient. A lot of deals come to you. I tell my agents, I tell my buyers, be patient. I think that one's coming to you because when you look at the statistics, there's no evidence they're up there. And they've eliminated all other competition because nobody's coming at that price, right? All right, let me summarize it this way. It's highly likely that when a buyer has properly prepared themselves for the negotiation of a purchase by doing their homework regarding real market statistics, that a certain calm and calculated approach can be achieved where the seller is allowed to also have their process and come to an acceptable price for the buyer without feeling manipulated or beaten up. All right. Now remember, you can take immediate action to get started in the right direction if you do need to sell or buy property right now or in the near future. And please do this. Smart. Prepared is the right way to go through this transaction. You can go get our free step-by-step guides that are waiting for you at griffincourses.com. That's griffincourses.com. Also, don't forget, you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen so that you don't miss out on any insights each time we upload an episode. We also post all these episodes on our social media channels. So if you go and turn on notifications or go find Griffin Realty Group, you'll see me sitting there talking to you. And I'm happy to help you stay abreast of the best practices for buying or selling. We'd also appreciate it if you would share our content with other people that are just like you or thinking about buying or selling and they need help. Get them this content and it'll help them get organized. Hey, thanks for listening. But remember, I sign off the same way every time, all my podcasts. Nobody's coming for you. So go take your own action steps to be prepared, and I will see you in the next episode to do just that. Thanks for listening.